So, in this series of talks, we're going to bring together the understandings about the sacred feminine with understandings from Buddhist philosophy. And Tara, the great and marvelous goddess within the Buddhist tradition, is really a place where we can find the qualities of the sacred feminine being expressed strongly and beautifully within Buddhist philosophy. So we're going to look at some of her teachings and understand who she is and what she embodies and what she can show us about how we can help ourselves, especially in times of difficulty. And I know that many of you now are experiencing difficulties beyond what you imagined that you might have to endure. And Tara is a goddess who is well known for her ability to help in times of trouble. So I'd like to focus on her in this series of talks. And of course, of all of the expressions of the great feminine within Buddhist philosophy, Tara's practices are perhaps the most accessible. Buddhism, which arose in India, and in many ways is in a conversation or in a response to the spiritual practices of India, is a place where you also find the expression of Tara. And she, as she enters into Buddhist experience, the different spiritual practices of India also continue to develop texts and teachings around Tara as well. And Tara, in her many forms, is considered to be the mother of all Buddhas. And she's the mother goddess of all things, the goddess of the heavens, the goddess of the earth, the goddess of the underworld, and she's the penultimate savioress. So again, although she is best known as a Tibetan Buddhist deity, she has long been revered in India. In Hinduism, she's known as a Mahavidya, or the great wisdom goddess. And she shares many of the other qualities that other Hindu goddesses share, including Kali, the goddess of creation and destruction, and Durga, the goddess who overcomes demons. So Tara is a Buddha, and a Buddha is simply someone who is awakened, who has attained a certain level of vision or enlightenment. And she's an all-female Buddha, very importantly. And of course, ultimately, all of the different deities must be understood beyond the duality of male and female. But there are certain aspects that one can understand about the deities by taking them in their dual form and learning about their expressions in duality that actually become stepping stones to a non-dual understanding. So we are focusing on Buddha as a female, Tara as a female Buddha, and looking at the stories about her, we find that she is an adept scholar, an adept yogini, and that she has incarnated many times as a female across the course of many lifetimes. And she has studied with many, many different Buddhas and many different dimensions. And she has attained the perspective of the Buddha or the awakened one herself. And, again, we're talking a little bit in duality here. And I think that this is important. Her practices and her teachings are important and have been important for millennia, because both Hinduism and Buddhism arose in social contexts where women were not always as considered as equal to men. And so having this concept of this great, powerful female force is very important for the tradition. And it's important for practitioners, especially female practitioners of the tradition, to really see this expression and to know that it is possible to step into an awakened state through the path of the experience of the feminine. So as she was going through her different lifetimes and going through her different incarnations as a goddess, she really was very much aware of how much other beings needed help. And she recognized that although there was a field of enlightenment in which all beings existed, that they were simply not aware of it. And so she determined through all of her enlightened activities to try to bring people into that awareness, to do whatever is needed to help people step into an awareness of this field of experience beyond their suffering. And her compassion allowed her to, or still allows her to interact with beings in any form, in any situation, and in any circumstance. And this is an awareness that emerges with the experience of Buddhahood. So Tara means a savioress or a savior. And it comes from the Sanskrit word tur, which means to help cross over. So what does this mean? The idea here is that Tara can help you cross over from the experience of suffering into a place of liberation, the liberation from suffering. And she does this in many different forms. There are actually 21 different Taras, and we're going to be exploring different ones in this series of talks. And probably the most famous, and the one that we're going to be focused on here today, is green Tara, who will often appear as a very dark blue or dark gold. And one of the ways in which you always recognize the green Tara is that she is always in the leg extended position, meaning that she is willing to step in and take action wherever help is needed. And one of the stories about the origin of Tara lies in the meditation and suffering that Avalokiteshvara, the compassionate Buddha, the Buddha of infinite compassion, was having. So he had determined himself that he was going to meditate infinitely on and focus his meditative power on any situation and any circumstance where help was needed. And he did this over long periods of time, and he was having a moment where he was recognizing that in spite of all of his efforts for all the long amount of time that he had been engaged in it, that he was actually recognizing that there was still so much suffering in the world. And so he began to weep, because in spite of all of his efforts in meditation for so many eons to relieve suffering, that there was still so much suffering in the world. So when he began to cry, the green Tara and the white Tara emanated out of the first two tears. And they basically said, hey, Avalokiteshvara, we got this. We know that there's important work to be done, and we are heading out into all the different worlds, all the dimensions where help is needed, and we are going to take the action that is needed. And the action that is needed to help relieve suffering. And of course, this was a great help to him, and he was able to continue his meditation. And the good news is, for all of us practitioners, that even to know that even Avalokiteshvara had his moments. Because I know that many of you are trying to understand the best way to help, and many of you may already be engaged in a Buddhist practice where you are focusing your meditative power in assisting other people. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about green Tara. As I said, she is probably the best known, along with white Tara, who is also a very fascinating field of wisdom. And but green Tara is really the best known, and she embodies compassion, protection, engagement, and courage. And these are qualities of the sacred feminine. These are important qualities that when they are present, things do get better, right? And I'd like to tell you a story that was recounted by Bokhar Rinpoche, who was only 18 when he and a group of Tibetans were fleeing the Chinese occupation of Tibet by making a dangerous crossing across the Himalayan mountains from Tibet into India. And this was happening in 1959, when the Chinese were really overrunning the country, and so many people were fleeing for their lives, and so many people were losing their lives. And the Chinese were destroying the monasteries and killing monastics. And, there was so much danger all around. And so of all of the different deities that they might have called upon as they tried to make their way through this calamitous experience, they called upon Tara, and they were repeating her mantra, which we're going to learn in just a little bit, to call her presence closer to them. And here's his account of a particularly difficult moment as they were making their journey across the mountains. And important to note that they were making their journey during winter. And he says, the wind was driving the falling snow into high drifts all around us. The animals were struggling to find their footing. As they slipped, the huge bags that they were carrying fell off and disappeared into the crevices down the mountainside. There were 60 of us who were trying to get through this dangerous mountain pass before the Chinese troops who were pursuing us caught up with us. Earlier in the journey, we had asked for guidance from Tara, and through divination, she is the one who told us which route to take through the mountains. And it was a little bit worried because this divination told us to go through the most difficult way and the most risky way. But we followed her instructions. And so there we were. The snowdrifts are piling up around us. We're losing all of our things into the crevices around us. The animals are struggling. And we knew at the outset that because winter was upon us, that it was likely that there was going to be some kind of snow. But we didn't really imagine that we were going to run into the kind of snowstorm that we ran into. And just before the snow had started falling, we had met a group of nomads coming up the mountain. They told us that they had seen Chinese troops on both sides of the pass. So we couldn't turn back, even though the snow was starting to fall. So our only choice was to continue. The snow blinded us as we struggled on, but we maintained our determined pace until we finally made it to the Tibetan settlement, actually in Nepal. So as we were warming ourselves by the fire the next morning, we learned that the Chinese troops had come very close to discovering us. While the blizzard had made it impossible for us to see even a foot in front of us, the Chinese troops had similar difficulties, and this proved beneficial since the conditions brought on by the storm hid us from their sight. By the time they reached the pass, it was no longer traversable, and they had to hunker down in the blackout conditions that the blizzard had brought on as we pushed our way through the storm, having gone through the pass. If the snow had not fallen, or if it had fallen slightly earlier or slightly later, we might not have been caught, or we might have. If the snow had not fallen, or had fallen slightly earlier or slightly later, we might have been caught. We could not help thinking that this timely snowstorm had been Tara's blessing. So these monks were evoking the power of the great feminine in the form of Tara to deliver them from their difficulties. And we too can invoke this power, becoming the agents of change as we meet the difficulties that we face in our everyday lives, And as we try to help others navigate things none of us could have ever imagined that we would have to navigate. And Tara teaches us how to develop that courage, our ability to trust in our ability to receive guidance as we navigate the challenges of our lives through stories like this. And there are many stories like this in the world of Buddhist philosophy. And His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, when asked, how do we confront the difficulties that we're all facing, has recommended that we engage in a Tara practice. And so what does that mean? Well, one of the things you can do is you can learn her mantra. And many of you know about mantras. Mantras are often phrases or words that capture an important essence of experience that we generally would like to draw ourselves closer to or work with in order to help ourselves develop. And so when we say the Tara of mantra, we are calling her in the same way that the monks were calling her to help. So I'd like to give you the mantra, and it's written out there, but I'll spell it for you. And the mantra is Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. So Om, O-M, Tare, T-A-R-E, Tu Tare, T-U-T-T-A-R-E, Ture, T-U-R-E, Soha, S-O-H-A. Om Tare, Tu Tare, Tu Re, Soha. And it means I bow down to Tara and I open my heart to the liberative force that dispels all emotional, physical, and spiritual suffering. I'll say that again. I bow down to Tara and open my heart to the liberative force that dispels all emotional, physical, and spiritual suffering. So this is what we are saying, and this is what our intention is as we are working with this mantra. So I'd like to just say it a little bit together now, but I'd also like to let you know that if you go to the sacredstream.org website, and there's information about this also in the card where you'll find her mantra, you will find a recording of her, of this mantra, and you can also work with that. So let's say the mantra together. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. 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 And you can continue in that way, just repeating it over and over again. I find myself saying this mantra throughout the day. And I will often say this mantra if, for instance, if I come upon a car accident that's just happened, or if I see an animal that's in distress and I can't get to them right away, I will say this mantra to try to bring this liberative action into the world in order to help improve things. So you can do this too, and I think it will offer you a sense of groundedness, a sense of possibility, a sense of hope for change for the better. And I think this is something that we all need during these calamitous times. And it's something that that Tara can help us with, help develop, and help remember. So I'd like to just close again with the translation of the mantra. I bow down to Tara and open my heart to the liberative force that dispels all emotional, physical, and spiritual suffering.